drought here in Zambia, a very serious drought, almost 3 million people in need of emergency food distributions.
We had to go back to our drawing boards to replan our exercise. And what I remember very well, during that period, we started distributing beans from other neighboring countries like Tanzania. People could live on these beans, okay? They would just cook, mash it, and then eat it as a meal.
With the generous donations of many countries, cash donations, we were able to purchase food in the region and elsewhere, non-GM food for distribution.
We didn't record any single death arising out of hunger.
Disaster had been averted, but the issue had raised a fierce debate in Zambia and throughout Africa.
Please tell the Americans and everybody else to respect the Zambians. We are suffering, we are starving, but we must be given a chance as people to make decisions.
Yesterday, the World Food Programme representative said, as far as they were concerned, this food is safe.
What the concern is that while it is true it can be eaten, we may not even have any health effects now, but the question is, do we know what will happen to our generation to come?
Zambia had another incentive. It exports vegetables to Europe. The Europeans have strict GMO controls. If those given the GM food aid grew crops from it, Zambia's exports might have been threatened.
The export markets demanded that if there was any activity of GMO in Zambia, then they wouldn't buy that particular crop. Now that meant loss of a market for our farmers. It also meant loss of foreign exchange earning for Zambia, and eventually it would have translated into reduced employment in Zambia and so many other negative implications.
Farmers were worried about possible GM contamination of their crops.
Every time you bring in something that hasn't been tested before, you're bringing in inherent dangers. It has happened in the past when we had food aid brought in before. We imported a pest that didn't have natural, predators here in Zambia, and it's still giving us a problem now. The larger commercial farmers may be able to afford the chemicals to protect their grain, but the small-scale farmers may not even be aware about it. So the same thing could happen in the GMO situation.
We have been assured, that no, these things will not happen. But the problem there is that there is no research data that has dispelled that. So our fears persist. I want to say here that lack of proof is not itself proof. Lack of proof is not itself proof.
Zambia is now considering on its own terms if GM crops have a place in its future.
We would want to produce crops that are not going to dent our environment currently. We would want to control cross-pollination, okay? And we would want to make sure that, we still enjoy our organic products. And so with all that in mind, we need to set the agenda for biotechnology. I think we have open arms towards it. But we will not just accept what has gone on elsewhere as being good for Zambia.
Impoverished nations such as Zambia have little capacity to make their own scientific assessments of the possible threats posed by GM crops. It's forced to rely on a fair and unbiased international regime, an issue Norway's aid minister is aware of.
Very, very few countries have the capacity necessary even to deal with not only the scientific part of this, but the regulatory framework that has to go with it. We as an international community and donor community, we have also to strengthen their possibility to deal with the GMO area.
Argentina, a world away from Zambia in more than one sense. Its government does not share the doubts about GM crops. At the end of the 1990s, GM soya was introduced. It proved so profitable that now half of the country's arable land is planted with a single species, Roundup-ready soya, produced by Monsanto.
The economic impact has been of $9 billion. $9 billion that had been not only generated for the growers but also for the whole country.
The big agri-businesses are the most enthusiastic growers of GM soya.
Agricultural producers must participate in the attainment of any profits. Through biotechnology, producers will get their profits, and very large profits.
But as more and more land was switched to GM soya cultivation, over 150,000 small farmers and labourers have quit their farms, claiming they can no longer compete. Orchards, green belts and dairy farms have gone under the soya juggernaut. It's good for the country's exports, but incredibly, the country now has to import basic foodstuffs such as milk and potatoes. It is how free trade was meant to work. The problem is that half the country can't afford the imported food. Recently, the National Institute of Statistics and Consensus estimated that half of Argentina's population was unable to meet their basic food needs. The big agro-producer association, APRICID, started a campaign called Soya Solidarity to help the hungry. Over 1 million people received food made from Roundup-ready soya, donated by APRICID's producers. The soya products were given out in schools, churches, orphanages, hospitals and soup kitchens. However, some are worried about the safety of eating GM soya beans. They point to research that has been done on a different GM crop, GM corn.
We can see that consumption of GM corn leads to direct changes in the bowel, changes in the bowel mucus of animals fed with this. And look at the cell growth in animals consuming GM. This is a normal bowel of a rat, which didn't eat GM corn. We already know that GM soya beans were approved without enough long-term experiments to determine that they're safe.
Monsanto's scientists insist the crop has been properly tested.
You have, of course, studies to demonstrate that if feeding or eating this new stuff, it's safe enough, and those studies are conducted basically on birds and chicken, because chickens are a particular animal that with a very fast grown and with a very easy way to detect some problems.
Roundup-ready soya is genetically modified to withstand the herbicide glyphosate. After spraying with glyphosate, only weeds die. The soya plant stays healthy. The use of glyphosate has gone up.
One thing we can link as regards soya production in Argentina is the very strong, intensive increase in the use of agrochemicals, particularly in the use of herbicides, mostly glyphosate. Since the beginning of the 90s, we've gone from less than 1 million litres to more than 150 million nowadays.
A consortium of US universities, funded by the US Department of Agriculture, gives glyphosate a clean billing. But medical observers here in Argentina want to find out if some of the chemicals used alongside glyphosate in the production of GM soya might be linked to health problems. Endosulfan, often used as an insecticide, is a cause of particular concern. According to the pro-biotech organization CarSafe, the sales of endosulfan in Argentina have gone up by 25% over recent years.
We have seen with a higher than normal frequency dead babies, babies born with abnormalities, and pregnancies without an embryo. Usually this happens to people who produce or spray soya or are exposed to soya fumigation. There are international studies which demonstrate that the use of persistent organic pollutants, to which endosulfan belongs, produce severe reduction in people's capacity to reproduce. That's what the big agrochemical companies, the GM multinationals, don't want to be said.
But the government believes the chemicals are not poisonous when used correctly.
Specify in the label how you have to do it, when you have to do it, and in what condition you have to do it. And sometimes they don't know that.
Critics also point to the environmental impact of the soya expansion. To create new fields for genetically modified crops, forests in the north of the country have been destroyed. This has limited the ability of the ground to absorb rainwater and increased flooding. In 2003, a huge flood devastated Santa Fe town. Over 100,000 people had to be evacuated.
Catastrophic floods, which used to happen every 100 years, now happen every 5 or 10 years. The levels of the river rose 20 times. There were places where water rose by 5 meters in 20 minutes. We have a saying, God always forgives, man sometimes, nature never.
Although the Santa Fe authorities confirm the link between deforestation and the floods, the Argentine government continues to support forest clearance for export crops. It's pressing ahead with other GM crops and has recently approved Roundup-ready maize. Each of these countries is finding its own way to deal with biotechnology. But on a wider scale, who is determining how biotechnology shapes our future?
The key decisions about a technology which impacts all of us are being taken elsewhere by other people who have their own vested interests in the technology. We have to find ways of trying to bring people into the process and allowing them to express whether they want this technology, what type of technology, what safeguards they would want to see. There's a whole set of issues about the technology and about its role in society which scientists alone cannot deal with.